Imagine a high-stakes poker game where the buy-in is $24 billion. The established players, a tight-knit group from South Korea and the United States known as Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron, have been running the table for decades, controlling the flow of the game with practiced ease. Suddenly, a newcomer from Wuhan, China, walks in, backed by a seemingly bottomless bankroll from the state, and lays down a hand nobody has ever seen before. This isn't a casino in Las Vegas. This is the brutal, cyclical, and globally essential memory market, a sector projected to be worth $200 billion by 2025. For years, the conventional wisdom held that China, despite its manufacturing prowess, could never compete at the cutting edge of semiconductors. The technological moat, dug deep over decades of innovation and astronomical capital investment, seemed simply too wide to cross. So how did a state-backed upstart, Yangtze Memory Technologies, or YMTC, emerge from relative obscurity in 2016 to build a memory chip that not only rivals but, in some metrics, surpasses those from the undisputed titan, Samsung? This is not just a story about cheap, state-subsidized chips flooding the market. It is a story of audacious engineering, a new front in a geopolitical tech war, and a strategic gamble that could reshape the foundation of our digital world. It is the story of the one Chinese chipmaker that genuinely struck fear into the heart of the memory oligopoly. To understand the disruption, one must first understand the market being disrupted. The memory chip industry is the bedrock of the digital world, the silent workhorse powering everything from smartphones and laptops to the vast data centers that run the cloud and artificial intelligence. This market is fundamentally split into two types of memory, which function like the two different parts of a human brain: short-term working memory and long-term storage. The first type is DRAM, or Dynamic Random Access Memory. Think of DRAM as a high-speed workbench. It is volatile, meaning it needs a constant supply of power to hold data. The moment you turn off your device, the workbench is wiped clean. But what it lacks in permanence, it makes up for in speed. DRAM is where your computer performs its active thinking, juggling applications, and processing information in real time. Manufacturing DRAM is a notoriously difficult art form. Its core component is a microscopic capacitor, a tiny bucket for holding an electrical charge, which must be paired with a transistor. The challenge is to make this capacitor infinitesimally small while ensuring it doesn't leak its charge too quickly, a feat of materials science and physics that becomes exponentially harder with each new generation. This immense complexity has created a formidable barrier to entry, resulting in a tight oligopoly where just three companies, Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron, control over 94% of the global DRAM market. The second type is NAND flash memory. If DRAM is the workbench, NAND is the digital warehouse. It is non-volatile, meaning it stores your photos, videos, and operating system even when the power is off. It is slower than DRAM, but can store far more data in the same physical space at a much lower cost. This is the technology inside solid-state drives, SSDs, and the memory cards in your camera. While the same big three are major players, the NAND market is slightly more fragmented, with companies like Kioxia and Western Digital holding significant shares, making it a more viable, if still incredibly difficult, target for a new entrant. For decades, the path to progress in the chip industry was defined by Moore's law, shrinking transistors to pack more of them onto a silicon wafer. But by the mid-2010s, traditional 2D NAND, where memory cells were laid out flat, hit a physical wall. The cells became so small and crowded that electrons would start to leak between them, a phenomenon known as cell-to-cell interference, which corrupts data and reduces the chip's lifespan. The industry was at an impasse. The solution was to stop building out and start building up. This led to the birth of 3D NAND. Instead of a sprawling single-story factory, chipmakers learned to build skyscrapers, stacking layers of memory cells vertically. The more floors, or layers in the stack, the more data could be stored in the same footprint without shrinking the individual cells to unreliable dimensions. This architectural shift kicked off a new technological race, a competition to see who could build the tallest, most efficient data skyscraper, escalating from 32 layers to 64, then 128, and now soaring past 300 layers. This fundamental transition from a planar to a vertical architecture was a moment of profound vulnerability for the incumbents. Their decades of accumulated expertise in 2D manufacturing were suddenly less relevant. The new battlefield of 3D NAND required mastering entirely new, incredibly complex processes, most notably high aspect ratio etching. The challenge of drilling trillions of perfectly uniform, microscopically narrow holes through hundreds of layers of material. This technological reset created a crack in the fortress of the memory oligopoly, a narrow opening through which a sufficiently ambitious and well-funded newcomer could potentially storm the castle. YMTC was not just born in this new 3D NAND era. Its entire strategy was engineered to exploit the unique challenges of this vertical world. Yangtze Memory Technologies was not a typical Silicon Valley startup born in a garage. It was forged in the industrial heartland of Wuhan in July 2016 as a state-directed mission, a key instrument in Beijing's ambitious Made in China 2025 industrial policy, which aimed to achieve critical self-sufficiency in core technologies like semiconductors. Its founding was not funded by venture capitalists, but by a national war chest. The partially state-owned enterprise Tsinghua Unigroup, along with the China Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund, known colloquially as the Big Fund, and the Hubei provincial government pooled an initial $24 billion to launch the company. The objective was clear: break the foreign stranglehold on memory chips and build a domestic champion that could compete on the world stage. For decades, the design of a NAND chip was monolithic. The memory array, the data skyscraper, and the peripheral logic circuits that control it, the building's elevators, power grid, and data lines, were all fabricated on a single piece of silicon. The logic circuits were typically built first, with the memory array constructed on top, a design known as CMOS underarray, or periphery undercell. This approach was efficient, but it created constraints. The manufacturing process for logic and memory are different, so building them together required compromises that limited the performance of both. At the 2018 Flash Memory Summit, YMTC unveiled a radical new approach that it called X-tacking. This innovative architecture decoupled the two manufacturing processes in a move that was both simple in concept and breathtakingly complex in execution. First, YMTC fabricates the memory array and the logic circuitry on two completely separate silicon wafers. The memory wafer contains the vertical stack of NAND cells, while the CMOS wafer contains the high-speed I/O and control logic. This parallel production allows each wafer to be optimized independently. The logic wafer can be made using a more advanced and faster manufacturing process, while the memory wafer can be tailored to maximize density and yield. Second, once both wafers are complete, one is flipped and precisely aligned over the other. They are then permanently fused together using a technique called hybrid bonding or wafer-on-wafer bonding. This process connects the two wafers with millions of microscopic, vertical copper-to-copper interconnects, creating a single, integrated 3D chip. Imagine building a skyscraper's steel frame and its complex electrical systems on two separate specialized construction sites. Then, with microscopic precision, you bond them together into a single, perfectly functional tower. This allows each team of specialists to work faster and more efficiently without getting in each other's way. That is the essence of X-tacking. The advantages of this gambit were immediate and profound. By separating the logic, YMTC could use a more advanced process for the CMOS wafer, resulting in significantly faster input-output I/O speeds. Its X-tacking 3.0 architecture achieved speeds of up to 2,400 megatransfers per second, a 50% improvement over its previous generation. This separation also allowed for a more compact and efficient layout, enabling YMTC to achieve industry-leading bit density. Its 232-layer chip, for example, reached a density of 19.8 gigabits per square millimeter, surpassing most competitors at the time of its release. Furthermore, YMTC claimed this parallel manufacturing approach shortened the entire product development time by at least 3 months and the manufacturing cycle by 20%, a massive advantage in the fast-moving memory market. YMTC's progress was astonishingly rapid. In 2018, it announced its first 32-layer 3D NAND chip alongside the revolutionary X-stacking architecture. Just 1 year later, it began mass production of its 64-layer chip. By 2020, it had a 128-layer chip, though initial production yields were a challenge, hovering around 30 to 40%. The true shockwave came in August 2022 when YMTC unveiled its 232-layer 3D NAND chip, the X39070. This product placed the young company squarely at the technological frontier, on par with or even ahead of incumbents who had been in the business for decades. By 2025, without major fanfare, YMTC began quietly shipping its 5th-generation NAND, featuring 294 total gates and 232 active layers, achieving a bit density of over 20 gigabits per square millimeter, a figure that remains highly competitive. This rapid ascent was possible because YMTC didn't play the same game as its rivals. While Western and Korean firms pursued a linear path of scaling, which increasingly relied on the most advanced and politically sensitive manufacturing equipment, YMTC executed an architectural leapfrog. The X-stacking design allowed them to innovate around their limitations. They could use older, more mature and more readily available deep ultraviolet (DUV) lithography tools for the logic wafer, while concentrating their most advanced etching and deposition techniques on the memory wafer alone. This was an asymmetric strategy. It suggested that China's path to semiconductor independence might not be a direct replication of the West's tool-dependent roadmap, but could instead involve heterodox design and packaging innovations that bypass the very choke points created by Western sanctions. This is why YMTC scared Samsung. It wasn't just a new competitor, it was a competitor playing by a different set of rules. Having engineered a technologically competitive chip, YMTC's next move was to conquer the market. Backed by its immense state funding, the company entered the global arena with an aggressive price-cutting strategy. This immediately sent shockwaves through the industry, with analysts coining the term NAND Apocalypse to describe a scenario where YMTC's irrational, state-backed oversupply would crash global prices, threatening the profitability and even the existence of more commercially minded players like Micron or Kioxia. The doctrine was a classic page from China's industrial playbook. Endure immense short-term losses to capture long-term market share, disrupt the established order, and ultimately fulfill the state's strategic goal of reducing critical dependencies on foreign technology. The first beachhead for this conquest was China's own massive domestic market. YMTC launched a consumer-facing brand named Zhitai, and its success has been nothing short of remarkable. By 2024, Zhitai had unseated Samsung as the top-selling SSD brand on major Chinese e-commerce platforms like JD.com. Products like the Zhitai T Plus 7100 SSD offered performance competitive with established drives from Western Digital and Kingston, but often at a significantly lower price, rapidly building consumer trust in a homegrown brand. Despite its domestic success and technological prowess, YMTC remains a relatively small player on the global stage. The NAND market is a behemoth, and the incumbents have deep roots and vast scale. This data illustrates the scale of the challenge. While YMTC's market share is growing, it is still in the single digits globally, fighting for every percentage point against giants who collectively control over 90% of the market. This leads to the central question surrounding YMTC's strategy. Is it sustainable? The evidence suggests that, from a purely commercial standpoint, the answer is no. The company's operations have required a continuous fire hose of state capital. After the initial $24 billion, YMTC received another $7 billion capital infusion in 2023, followed by several more multi-billion-dollar fundraising rounds to offset the staggering costs of R&D and retooling in the face of US sanctions. Financials that became public in 2025 revealed that after posting a small profit in 2023, the company ran a net loss of over $11 million in just the first 3 quarters of 2024. The low-price strategy is not a path to profitability, it is a geopolitical weapon. YMTC's business model is not governed by the quarterly earnings reports that dictate strategy at Micron or Samsung. It operates on a geopolitical timeline, driven by the long-term strategic objectives of the Chinese state. This makes it a uniquely dangerous competitor. While a private company might cut production during a market downturn to stabilize prices, YMTC has a strategic incentive to increase production to gain market share, further destabilizing the notoriously cyclical market. Its sustainability is not tied to market forces, but to the political will of Beijing. YMTC is not China's only memory champion. To truly understand the nuances of China's semiconductor ambitions, one must look at its other national hero, Yangtze Memory Technologies, or CXMT. Founded in Hefei in 2016, the same year as YMTC, CXMT was tasked with the even more daunting challenge of breaking into the DRAM market. Like YMTC, it is a core part of the national strategy and has received immense state support. Yet its story has been one of impressive progress, tempered by hard technological realities. The reason for this divergence lies in the fundamental physics of the two memory types. As discussed, DRAM's reliance on a tiny, three-dimensional capacitor makes it exceptionally difficult to scale. This capacitor is the heart of the DRAM cell, and as process nodes shrink, making it small enough to fit while preventing its electrical charge from leaking away, becomes a monumental challenge of materials science and engineering. This is where the US sanctions have been surgically effective. The most advanced manufacturing processes for DRAM, particularly at nodes of 14 nanometers and below, rely on extreme ultraviolet (EUV) lithography, the most sophisticated and expensive manufacturing tool in human history, produced by a single company in the Netherlands, ASML. The US-led sanctions have explicitly and effectively blocked China from acquiring these EUV machines. The result is a persistent and significant technology gap. While CXMT has made remarkable strides, launching its first domestically produced DDR5 memory on a 16-nanometer process in early 2025, it remains roughly 3 years, or 2 full technology generations, behind leaders like Samsung and SK Hynix. The Korean giants are already mass-producing more advanced 12-nanometer DRAM and are developing even smaller nodes, a lead enabled directly by their access to EUV technology. While CXMT has stated it plans to develop 15-nanometer DRAM without EUV, mimicking a strategy used by Micron, this path becomes increasingly difficult and costly with each successive generation. This comparison between YMTC and CXMT is critical. It reveals that China's semiconductor strategy is not a monolith. Spectacular success in one domain, NAND, does not automatically translate to success in another, DRAM. YMTC's X-tacking was a brilliant architectural innovation that allowed it to work around equipment limitations. CXMT, however, faces a fundamental physical barrier in the DRAM capacitor that is much harder to overcome through clever design alone. The story of these two champions highlights the targeted effectiveness of the US sanctions on EUV, which have created a true bottleneck for China's most advanced ambitions, even as its NAND sector has found a way to thrive. YMTC's meteoric rise did not go unnoticed. As its technology began to rival the industry's best, the geopolitical hammer came down. In October 2022, the US Commerce Department placed YMTC on its unverified list, signaling deep suspicion. By December 2022, it was moved to the full entity list, a move that effectively cut the company off from its key American equipment suppliers like Lam Research and Applied Materials, as well as critical design software. The most immediate and public consequence was Apple's decision to drop YMTC as a potential NAND supplier for the iPhone. This was a reversal made under intense political pressure from Washington and represented a massive blow to YMTC's quest for international legitimacy. From the perspective of the US government, YMTC is not just a commercial competitor, but a national security risk. Lawmakers and the Department of Defense have officially designated YMTC as a Chinese military company, citing its deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. The primary fear is that Beijing will leverage YMTC's state-subsidized position to flood the market, drive out Western competitors, and establish a commanding share of the global memory supply. This could create a critical strategic dependency, giving China the power to disrupt supply chains for everything from consumer electronics to advanced military hardware at will. In the face of these sanctions, YMTC did not collapse. Instead, fueled by a fresh $7 billion capital injection from the state, it accelerated its pivot to a domestic Chinese supply chain, forging deeper partnerships with homegrown equipment makers like Nora Technology Group and Advanced Microfabrication Equipment, AMEC. This forced pivot is a double-edged sword. On one hand, YMTC has demonstrated remarkable resilience, continuing to innovate and ship record-breaking chips even after being cut off from the world's best tools. In doing so, it has become the anchor customer for China's own burgeoning equipment industry, accelerating Beijing's ultimate goal of a fully self-sufficient semiconductor ecosystem. On the other hand, this self-reliance has come at a cost. Reports from late 2024 indicated that one of YMTC's latest chips, produced using domestic tools, had 70 fewer layers than a previous version made with Western equipment. This reduction was likely a necessary compromise to achieve acceptable manufacturing yields, as the Chinese tools, while improving, are still not as precise or reliable as their foreign counterparts. This reveals the central risk to YMTC's future. The battle is no longer just about market share or price wars. It is a fundamental race in manufacturing technology. Can China's domestic supply chain mature fast enough to keep YMTC at the cutting edge? Or will the reliance on second-best tools permanently relegate it to being a good enough domestic supplier, always a step or two behind the global leaders? The answer to that question will determine whether YMTC is a sustainable threat or a temporary state-funded anomaly.